And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
St. Francis of Assisi,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. As you may have noticed, we felt that after 3 years of being a pretentious academic club, we could take it one step further by wearing academic gowns. Thank you for bearing with us. This is probably the least well-organized debate we've ever had. We're on the back of our anniversary weekend, but I think it's something somewhat fitting that for those of us graduating, we still do everything last minute. But we appreciate you guys. We appreciate you guys making the time to come here tonight. The club made something of a mistake in giving me the microphone for one last time, and I warn you all, I plan to make full use of the opportunity to speak at length this evening. So in my introductory comments, which shouldn't last more than 20 or 25 minutes, I'd like to split my comments into two parts, the first half and the second half. And between those two parts, I'd like to make 4 main points. Point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, and point number 4. Under the second point, I'm going to make 3 additional observations. Observation A, observation B, and observation C. Thank you, Sina. But in all seriousness, well, not much seriousness, but Veritas over these past few years has given many of us, who've been here since the beginning, it's given us so many things. It has, for example, taught some of us how to use the dramatic pause in our speech. And it's been a lot of fun as well, and we've had a good time. I do want to encourage everyone tonight, this is definitely a somewhat arcane topic, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. But I do want to encourage everyone to make the most of this. See this as an academic free-for-all. So any observations or points or arguments you have about academic culture here at Franciscan, make this your opportunity to say what you want to say, whether it's about the core curriculum, whether it's about our classes, whether it's about the way we market ourselves as a university, whether it's about dress code, whatever it might be. I really encourage you to, especially dress code, make your observations this evening. On that point, about the motion, so the original wording of the motion tonight was this house believes that Franciscan is not academically excellent. And that motion came about after a 2-hour meeting of about 4 of us guys when we were very tired and somewhat desperate. Having slept on it, we did decide to tone it down slightly, especially out of respect for our alma mater. And so the updated wording is this house believes that Franciscan's academic culture is not excellent. And I did just want to clarify to the house, this is our 26th Amongst debate, it's the last one for those of us graduating. And I want to clarify that this motion arises not in any way out of a dislike for Franciscan. I think I speak for the whole house when I say that we sincerely and greatly love Franciscan University around the world. And really it's precisely because of that love for this place that we feel inclined to debate these issues, to question whether we can continue to grow and continue to become better. So it's really from that place that this debate arises. So, with that being said, I was being somewhat sarcastic when I said I would speak at length. So let's get on with debating. First, however, we're going to take the vote. So I'm going to, again, read the motion and take the initial vote. I'm going to ask you to stand and raise your hand. And we're going to do, you can vote at the beginning, you can say, coming into this debate this evening, whether you're firm, whether you're opposed, or whether you're undecided. And I've said there's a previous debates, but I really encourage you guys to consider saying you're undecided, unless you're really not. But if you are somebody who doesn't fully understand what the motion means tonight, or you think terms need defining, then you're probably undecided. Or if you're someone who thinks there's good arguments on both sides, haven't fully made up your mind, you're probably undecided. That's not to say everyone should be undecided, but I want to make sure we know that's an option, because what's really interesting with these debates is to see how many people change their mind over the course of the night, and we'll see that at the end of the debate. And often it's those people who are undecided at the beginning who are the ones who get swayed the most by the arguments. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead. So the motion is, this house believes that Franciscan's academic culture is not excellent. So could you please stand and raise your hand if you affirm that motion? Thank you. If you oppose the motion, please stand and raise your hand. Nice. Good. Thank you. And if you're undecided, please stand and raise your hand. That's what we like to see. All right, we will give those numbers at the end of the opening statements. Thank you, everybody. So, without further ado, I would now like to invite the first speaker from the affirming side.
You're here. You're here.
You guys like that speech I wrote for fun? Good. Well, I'm pleased to stand before you all tonight as the first presenter of the final speech, especially because I get to affirm with David Hahn, who 4 years ago at the first Veritas event we ever presented, we were presenting against each other. So it's somewhat fitting that in a debate of academic culture, we should come and, having reconciled each other, argue against the idea that the university which has trained us is in fact academically excellent by culture. So if you forgive this irony, Hahn has said most of what I wanted to say as far as an introduction is concerned, which is that we have no feelings of bitterness or resentment towards our alma mater, nor do we have any desire to criticize the university such that we appear as though we're superior because we've come up with a criticism, which seems to me to be a mark of a weak-minded intellect. Rather, the idea here is to take the formation that we have received, apply it intelligently towards the institution that we have received the training from, and come up with sound conclusions based on the quality of the institution that has given us the same ability to judge those criteria. I'll get 30 seconds back, right? No. So, the mic is on.
No, just getting closer to your face.
Well, there we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will make two broad points for you this evening, which is that the core program at Franciscan University is a definitive argument against the idea that culturally we've instantiated academic excellence. And then I'm going to give you some basic arguments, or maybe observations, I think, about the general culture of Franciscan, which I think will be pretty undeniable as evidence that we as students do not live as though academic excellence were the primary concern of us as university students. So to begin, if you allow me to, the core program at Franciscan University is an essential thing to focus on in this argument, because what a core program means is that these are the central, or the essential, actually might be a better word, courses that it is necessary to take for one to fulfill the mission and aim of the university itself. Now, Franciscan University is demonstrably a liberal arts university, and therefore this means something like the apprenticing of the student into the history of Western thought, into the 1,000-year tradition of the church, and into the general history of Catholicism that is made perfect in the Western intellectual tradition. To that end, let me introduce you to the 40 or so classes which work for the core program at Franciscan University. The proliferation of courses, among other things, seems to me to indicate that the university has not yet decided what things are actually core classes. It's entirely possible to go through Franciscan University taking only core classes, or classes that could count as it, and graduate having taken nothing else. This seems to me a bit preposterous. Moreover, there is nothing like an intelligent ordering principle behind the core program. To move from one thing chronologically to the next, logically to the other, such that a cohesive argument is built from first principles to final conclusions, which seems to be the, maybe I want to say it, primary, although perhaps not even so, because it seems to be almost the only discerning criteria one can have for a core curriculum, and it's conspicuously absent at the university. At best, you may show up at your advisor's office and see which boxes it's necessary to check, and of course you work these around the courses you're really interested in. And if you're lucky, they're offering philosophy of the human person online that semester so that you can skip most of the readings. Ladies and gentlemen, a university which does not take upon itself the responsibility to show to students what the true essence of a liberal arts education is, and the beauty that is possible for those of us who are interested in a Catholic education, to be brought to a love of that which is true, good, and beautiful, and to be shown that these are the most important things that you can get by coming to a university, not merely a training academy of some sorts. and that the idea that we could abstain from training the human person as a university, these students who do not know better, and instead leave it to them to decide, and to pick from among courses that are so scattered as to be laughable, is to me a demonstrative argument against the idea that the university itself, as an institution, is making it easy or conducive to students who are really interested in connecting with the great ideas of the liberal education that has been the better part of the civilization. Certainly, there are elite academics here, but we cannot confuse elite academics with academic elation, or something, or those who are really excellent. So you might have individual professors who try and do very good things, and this is laudable. There are individual programs that do very good things. This also is laudable. But it seems to me as though students who succeed at Franciscan University, students who really do become academically excellent in the sense of having inculcated the best that the liberal education has to offer, are those who have stumbled upon it accidentally. Maybe they have an older brother or sister or a professor who was able to show it to them, but the university has not structured its course curriculum such that this is the general experience of students that we have. Here, here. Now, I think before we move through the argument thus far, I'm going now to, I suppose, leave the idea that we're going to make intellectual arguments and make some rather gut-punching cultural observations. You can bear with me. And hopefully I've demonstrated that I am intending to do something intellectually serious here. But, cultural observation number one. It's interesting to me that we can get hundreds of students to pay thousands of dollars to travel thousands of miles every year to remote locations across the world in dingy and dirty and dangerous conditions to do mission work. But it's almost impossible to get more than 30 students to walk down the hill to the room we're sitting in right now for our Friday academic lectures. Here's here. Point number two. The way that we as university students recreate is indistinguishable in form from pagan ritual or from the thing that secularists do at the Roman. If anyone here has ever been to an AMPG dance knows this is the case. Point number three. We tend, as university students, to be bound with that which is immature. And I think part of this is the fact that we are growing up and yet not becoming adults because we're not being led into this sort of thing. The university keeps us at a level of immaturity because we're too spread out. Rather, if you will, than taking upon itself to educate the students in the liberal arts tradition, we've instead decided that it would be a good idea to diversify as much as possible. So students are expected to be involved in mission trips, in mission work, in households, in academics, in student life opportunities, in excite things, in clubs, in festivals and whatnot. It's impossible for you to be so diverse on these number of things and also remain fundamentally committed to academics. It's not that these things are bad, so to speak, but it is the case that we have subjugated the idea that Franciscan University graduates should be warriors of the new charismatic evangelization rather than people who should be well-formed, liberally educated individuals. And finally, if you can bear with me, at the request of our chairman, I will make a comment on dress code. I stand before you tonight as someone who is taking upon himself the academic gown of a graduate. And I think that this is appropriate, and this is how one ought to dress, and especially if one were to dress to class. But this is not, of course, how we do dress to class. As a matter of fact, most men at this university seem to dress something like this. I'm not sure it even has more holes than them. And of course, if you are a young lady at the university, ladies and gentlemen, these things are fitting in their place. The university is not the place. And the idea that we as students can go to class and look at one another and see that this is how we present ourselves because what we think, it seems to be a clear argument that as students we are not committed to the idea that academic excellence is the reason we are here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Larkins. Do we have a question for the Honourable Speaker? The gentleman up in the gallery, you can just raise your voice.
Oh yeah, what's your major?
In my time at the university, I've been a philosophy major, a theology major, an engineering major, a humanities and Catholic culture major, a legal studies minor, I've been a life studies minor, an honor student, I have been in trade school, I have been homeschooled, I have been public school. This is more than an answer to your question, but I take it as an opportunity to say that what I am attempting to go at here is not merely someone who is coming from the perspective of the ivory tower philosophy theology guy who's like, everyone should do what I do because it's cool when Scott Hahn does it, right? Which is a compelling argument. But rather than, my choice of major is not a reflection of the argument that I'm making for you here tonight, but that from multiple angles, anyone who is coming to Franciscan University, regardless of your intended major, should understand that the essence of why you have chosen to come to a liberal arts education institution is to receive a liberal arts education. Any other institutional concern is ancillary to that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Larkins, for that speech. And I would just say to the honourable gentleman that he looks so good in black that perhaps a change of vocation will be in order. We'll now move to the first speech from the opposing side.
Thank you much, Mr. Larkins. You are one of my favorite speakers in Veritas, especially when the clothes come off. But in any case, so I just wanted to thank all of you for coming. This is a really fantastic time. The last time that I presented, I actually was presenting with Mr. Denley, and I had something of a flashback because at that time we were presenting on a theological concept called the Dare We Hope That All Men Are Saved situation. It's right there, actually. And when we stood up to say that we were affirming that motion, we were the only two people in the entire field house to affirm that motion. That debate ended with me not affirming anymore. So that was kind of a rough time. Hopefully this will be a little bit better. But anyway, so I was also, whenever I would air this to my professors on campus, like I was just in class, they always did not want to come to this debate, but they always had very, very strong opinions that this was, in fact, a strong intellectual culture, which I just thought was kind of funny. And I think it's interesting, right? Because in some respects, this is a fairly high stakes debate, right? Because if we choose to, we don't actually have the postcard, that's too bad. I like to point to it. And but if we end up affirming this motion, it is, to quote the great James Duarte, a self-own, is it not? We chose the wrong university if we have come here and then we have decided, well, in fact, the academic culture is poor here, is not excellent. That doesn't necessarily mean that that the motion is false, but the stakes are at least fairly intellectually high. So what does excellent mean? I would like to appeal to one of the greatest philosophers of all time, that being Aristotle, and his statement. His definition of excellent was the mean between two extremes. That idea of that the virtue is excellent. And I was kind of thinking, what would the two extremes be in intellectual culture and excellence for that? And it seems to me that the two extremes are, one being a culture that is utterly uninterested in academics. So we see this in a lot of small sections on campus of people who do seem incredibly uninterested in academics and very interested in their date tomorrow. But then the other extreme would be, it seems to me, a culture that is utterly focused on academics with no interest on formation outside of our intellectual parts. So this would be a person who spends all of their time strictly studying with no friends, events, or formation ethically, personally, morally. And so that seems to me to be the two extremes. And so the middle would be a culture that is formative, both personally and intellectually. Now, how do we get a culture that is both formative ethically and personally and intellectually? Well, it seems to me that it comes down to four basic parts, and that would be our classes, the content of our classes, the faculty that we have presenting these classes to us, the extracurriculars that we have available to us, both intellectually and personally for formation, and then the general resources that the university provides to us, whether that be institutes, whether that be study abroad programs, etc., etc. And so how does Franciscan compare when we look at all of these circumstances? So first of all, our classes and more specifically our academic programs. There is actually a surprisingly, at least to me, because you don't necessarily hear about them, but there is a surprisingly large number of incredibly well-respected programs at Franciscan University, including, if you're like me, who spends all their time at Egan. There's a lot of really great STEM programs at Franciscan, which I thought was kind of cute, but I'm kidding. I said I was kidding. But our biology program is incredibly respected. Our computer science program is actually an excellent pipeline into the computer science of the government, because they look for Franciscan students because there is an implicit trust in the moral formation of Franciscan students, which I thought was really interesting. Our philosophy and our theology programs kind of speak for themselves. We have Dr. Hahn, we have Dr. Bergstrom, Dr. Gage for our philosophy, as well as Dr. Dom, are fairly well-respected in their fields. They are really good authorities in that regard. And our nursing program might be the most accomplished. The standardized test for nursing, by which you get your degree, or your license, the average passing rate for the United States is 78%. And Franciscan University has never gone below 80%. 3 years ago, that passage rate was 96%. So Franciscan is academically excellent in its core by itself. Our faculty, as I mentioned, is also excellent. Extracurriculars too, it does seem to me, do funnel themselves for the sake of academic culture. We do have the Veritas Society, after all. You all are investing in an academic culture, in an excellent academic culture. We have the Grace seminars at the end of the semester, where people are given an opportunity to present to their professors and to the other students in their grades the research that they have done in their semesters. They are given awards. It's all a really impressive opportunity to show the things that you've done academically in these instances. And then finally, institutes. We do have the Bioethics Institute. We have the Catechetics Institute. We have, obviously, Austria, where there are world-class professors in Austria presenting to us, while we are also being given an excellent opportunity to experience a new continent. So, while unfortunately I am not as entertaining as Mr. Larkins, for reasons legitimate and illegitimate, it does seem to me that it is incredibly difficult to argue that a university that provides the resources that our university has is in any way not culturally and academically excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spilder. Do we have a question for the Honourable Gentleman? Dr. Harwood.
Here.
Could I ask you, so it seems pretty clear how you defined our academic accomplishments, right, both in terms of the faculty we have and what our students are able to do. But could I ask you to define the distinction? What does culture actually mean? And what is academic culture as opposed to academic accomplishment?
Sure. So it seems to me that an academic culture would be the circumstances that we are presented to achieve academic accomplishments. So I did provide a lot of things that Franciscan does well as far as the end product, but my implicit proof in that regard is that we are being taught by these people who are very highly accomplished, and that offers us an excellent opportunity to foster that intellectual ability and our own intellectual accomplishment. So it seems to me that would facilitate that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spilder. We will now move to the second speaker from the affirming side, Mr. Hahn.
Good evening, everyone. It has been a real joy in the last 4 years to be on Franciscan's campus. I'm a big fan of it. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is David. I'm the son of the illustrious book writer and speaker, Kimberly Horn. Councilwoman. And I want to present to you a more moderate view. Some of you who are there and you're like, David, I am not certain that this academic culture is, as they would say, excellent, but I'm not convinced it's as terrible as Mr. Larkins made it seem. And I would say, me too. Me too. I'm on your side. That's why you should vote for Mark. And so, academic excellence. Now, what do we mean by that? Mr. Spieldinner said it's the mean between two extremes. I would posit that that's not really applicable here. I would say that what we're talking about, right, is actually an achievement of perfection. And then, I think a good rebuttal would be, David, gun. That's hyperbolic! And I would say, don't say that, there are children in the room. And I would say, I'm kidding, I know what you mean. And so, yes, I would say it's hyperbole, right? It's a catchphrase. What it's meant to communicate is, we do what we do well. We do it very well.
You're here.
Now, I would like to re-examine that. In light of what Mr. Larkins brought up, the core academic program is, I believe, deficient. It is the democratization of academics instead of a properly ordered, hierarchically structured academic formation. Right? We're coming to this institution not to be given the means to just go out into the job world. Right? We're coming to this institution to be formed as great human beings who have refined their powers, both intellectual and volition, right, to succeed in this world. To succeed in this world. And so, going forward, what I want to propose is that, when we think of academically excellent institutions, right, even using the hyperbole, I think that universally we could agree that this is like 20th century Oxford, right? This is Harvard, this is the Ivy League schools, right? This is what I would imagine we would all agree is what the gold standard of academic culture at its most excellent, right? People walking around in robes and having great conversations and having scones and other things like that. Now, with that said, Franciscan is nowhere close to that. Nowhere close to that at all. But this is not meant as a slight, because those very institutions have forsaken their intellectual grounds, and they are riding off of name only. But Franciscan, ladies and gentlemen, is on the rise. We can achieve excellence in our academic culture. We can dedicate ourselves to such institutions like the Veritas Society. We can dedicate ourselves to our intellectual betterment and also making it more achievable, more applicable, and more relatable to our peers on this campus. We can build relationships with our professors. We can start clubs that actually are conducive to thought, that are conducive to a culture that is excellent, beautiful, and is not involving pop music and gyration. This being said, I think we are given an invitation to recognize the deficiency. Not in the sense that we have given up on this, but I will say this, there seems to be an equal opportunity on campus, some might say a mean between two extremes, where I can go and take Dr. Bergsma and just get the tar kicked out of me every week. Or I can take other classes and get an A very easily. This is not meant as a judgment. I have taken the easy A before. But it is something to note that the university is not taking steps currently to make it harder to do that. And I think they should. I think that they should. I think they should care about our own academic success in the face of our weakness, acknowledging that the children that they are forming are in fact not already perfect, right? I think so. To reiterate these 3 points, we're not excellent, even by a sort of general standard where we take it as hyperbole, but we are on the rise, and we can achieve it. The second point being mainly that there is a divide on this campus between the easy classes that you can take. It's easy to fall through the cracks. It's easy to fall through the cracks. And the last thing that I would like to say, reiterating my fellow's point, is that the emphasis that we give in our culture does not seem to be one of academics. I think this is significant. I think that this is poignant. This is an academic institution. It doesn't matter what other well-rounded things that you're doing. Those things are just a part of the general culture. But when we're talking about a holistic culture, right, to point at something like the nursing program or the STEM programs and to say, now these are great, so let's forget about that other stuff. These students work their butts off, so who cares about marketing major. And just calling them out, I see him, AMDG, that's all I'm saying. Now let's share them on. Brothers, too. What I want to invite you all to do, though, before I conclude this speech, is just to re-examine the ways that you can invite your peers. Challenge yourselves. Build relationships with your professors, because we're not academically excellent in our culture. But we can get there. We can get there. And I want you to take the first step tonight, which is by affirming this motion. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hahn. Do we have a question for the speaker? Any questions? All right, the speaker is thanked. And we move now to the second speech and the final opening speech from the opposing side.
Thank you very much. So, we're all Frannies. I noticed at the beginning, the undecided. That's fantastic. It's funny how, we know what Franciscan is. And I love it. I love Franciscan. You're here. Now, I've been thinking about, academically excellent. There were excellent points brought up about the core program, deficiencies we may have. So what is it that makes it academically excellent? Okay. Mr. Hahn brought up Oxford and that whole culture. I'd actually thought beforehand, this type of scale, I call it the Oxford-Harvard, let's say, scale of academic excellence, right? They're very prestigious, they have very prestigious degrees, they have all these fantastic buildings and wealth of knowledge. I would not call them academically excellent. I wouldn't, right? Because I believe they don't have this key characteristic that makes something academically excellent, which is a true pursuit of truth. This pursuit of truth above all the externalities, right? And I'll make an Augustinian point that he makes in the City of God, that the externalities of a culture are not different than the loves which the Commonwealth pursues. What is it about Franciscan that draws people? What is it about Franciscan's academic culture that draws them to want to be a part of it? Well, as Catholics, it's not just pursuing the degree. It's not just pursuing, the success that will come out of it, but really it is a common love and pursuit of truth. I'm extremely humbled looking at all the fantastic debate motions we've had and all the wonderful speakers who have stood here and have talked and have. Why? Why are we doing this? There's no money involved. There's no success or furthering of your career involved here. It's just a pursuit of truth. That's what it is. There's something about Franciscan that drew me to be a part of this culture and this pursuit and this love of truth. And you guys know all those externalities, right? Are the fact. So when I was a wee freshman at the very beginning, I would go to Dr. Plato's office and just ask the most simple-minded, stupid questions about philosophy. And hours would go by, and Dr. Plato was willing to give his time to speak with me. And why? Was it furthering the class? Was it whatever? No, it was a common pursuit of truth. So, that's one of the major indicators, right? An academic culture is not dreamed up in the administration about some core program that we can perfectly make, right? It's a cooperation of the administration's idea of a program and then the relation of the faculty and students to pursue it, right? So if you want to build an academically excellent culture, which I believe we do have, it's this relation of the students and the faculty in a common pursuit of truth for the program, right? It's this common love. Now, I have very big, let's say, critiques of the academic culture here at Franciscan. I think many people do, right? Whether it's the core program, whether it's certain other programs. But this is because I love this place. That's the reason why we care. That's the reason why we critique it, right? I believe my opponent's critiques of the academic culture are all valid, but what they really demonstrate is a love for this place. and a love for that academic culture. What is it that distinguishes us, that I've said before about the Oxford, Harvard, let's say, scale of academic excellence? The achievements that they've achieved. I believe they've lost the pursuit of truth. I believe they've lost that love. And if you lose that love, then what are you left with, ultimately? So that love is what's going to allow and continue Franciscan to flourish academically excellently. I think the Veritas Society is a large part of that, let's say, evidence of the pursuit of love. Pursuit of truth. You can say pursuit of truth. Mostly with, things like the shouldn't have weapons. There's many such. You should have done the backflip right after that. That would have been added to it. So it's this common pursuit of truth. Is this common pursuit, and I don't need to elaborate like the fact that we built let's say the science department's up. Our theology department is of course one of the best in the country. All of these externalities flow out of that love, that common pursuit. So I believe we do have an academically excellent culture. And I believe that the externalities show that, and the evidence is there for that. And as will be brought up, let's say reservations about the core curriculum, other such programs, I believe that these are evidence of us caring about academic culture, of us wanting to build an academically excellent culture. And so I'm very excited to hear all the speeches regarding core curriculum, regarding how the faculty, whatever, different programs. And I believe that shows that true love and pursuit of truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denley. The chairman reserves the question to himself.
Wonderful.
My question is, it seems to me that when we speak of culture, the culture of an institution, we're talking about something institutional, something that is, in the case of the university, campus-wide, it's across the student body. And so my question for you is, do you think you gave certain anecdotes, personal anecdotes, you talked about the role of the Veritas Society, which is a particular subset of the student body, but do you think that the academic culture across the student body and across the campus is excellent?
Yes, I do. And I believe it's because we actually try and pursue truth. There's whole cultures at universities where it is purely for seeking degrees and seeking jobs, and that's an important part of the pursuit, right? But an academic culture is not one in which individuals merely pursue degrees, right? It's one in which a whole culture and a love of truth produces these externalities in the culture. It produces things like the Veritas Society. I don't think we really realize how unique we are. In a world that is constantly pursuing individual ends through university, you have 40,000 people who do not care about each other in one place under a state-run institution, and they're all pursuing their individual means. A truly excellent academic, and I would accuse Oxford and Harvard of becoming that right as well, but a true academic culture pursuing truth, I don't think we realize what we do have here. It really is something unique and something special, and I look forward to seeing it in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denley. All right, that concludes the open floor speeches. So I'm now going to update everybody on the initial vote count. So again, the motion was, this House believes that Franciscan's academic culture is not excellent. It seems to be getting louder as I speak. The vote we had was 16 affirming that motion, 6 opposing, and 68 undecided. So this is certainly a debate very much up for grabs. At this point, I also want to just mention a little promo that there will be, at the end of this debate, given it's the final debate of the semester, there's going to be a hot food social buffet thing over in the JC tent. I think we have food for 100 people, so we should be just about right, but if you stick to the end, we'll be having a social afterwards. Everyone's invited, and it is free, of course. So, we'll now move into the open floor. So if you have speeches, please just stand and wait to be recognized. Mr. Cyril.
So imagine that you are the quintessential Franciscan student. It's a late September evening. It's about 7:02 p.m. You just walked outside of the CAF. and you finish dinner. You've done all your classes for the day, you've done all your homework, and now you have to decide what you're going to do for the rest of the evening, right? Well, if you're in a household, you might have commitment, or you might have practice for a sports team or an intramural game. Or maybe you'll hang out with your friends, go out somewhere, maybe watch a movie with them, maybe go back to your room and watch Netflix by yourself for an hour and cry. But one thing that you're not going to do, I almost guarantee, is you're not going to go to the gallery and attend that academic lecture for the evening by that one speaker that you've never heard of. Without that topic, you don't find very interesting. In this very brief speech, I'd like to bring up 2 points that I think are very important to talk about. Well, actually, 1 point and 2 examples. And it was sort of brought up by Mr. Larkins at the end of the speech. And I think it's the idea of what we do in our free time. And now, I know I'm making kind of a stretched analogy here, but if we agree with Joseph Pieper that leisure is the basis of culture, I think that at Franciscan, we can determine what our culture is like based on our leisure activities that we spend time doing. And actually, I think if we look at our culture through the lens of leisure, I think it's actually pretty obvious that we don't have an excellent academic culture on campus, but I'd like to give 2 examples of this, and I think these 2 examples do the best job of illustrating the point. And the first one is the academic lectures that Mr. Larkins brought up. And I guess I would say this. The statement would be, if we had an excellent academic culture on campus, then we would have more people attending our academic lecture series on campus. Now, what I'm not saying, oh, all we need is a packed gallery for every academic lecture, and then we have an excellent culture. It's not that. And I'm not saying that all we have to do is, for anything to be excellent, we just need numbers and it's quantity over quality. I'm not saying that at all. But what is interesting about our lecture series is that I think at a university in which you have a culture that's excellently academic, right? A culture that we've heard the principles that the affirming side has brought up, that, or the negative side, a culture that's seeking truth, a culture that is seeking to make its individuals, to seek the higher things in life, right? To better themselves intellectually and morally. I think one of the things they would do in their free time is attend lectures that brought by some of the best speakers that can be brought onto campus, talking about some of the best topics that can be talked about on campus. And it's not the case that we never have people show up to these. I mean, I've been to them and, there's a fair amount of attendance. But at a university where a speaker such as Matt Fradd or Jim Caviezel can completely pack the field house with hundreds and hundreds of students. And I'm not saying that these men aren't intellectually minded, that they're not very articulate and smart. They are. But they're not talking about things that are of an intellectual nature. Why can't we have the same thing here? And I think the reason why is because people they're more attuned to entertainment than they are to actually academic excellence. And I do think the blame is both ways. I don't think it's merely on the fact of the students. I also think that academics themselves might do a better job of advertising. They could do a better job of maybe providing food or Chick-fil-A events. You can pay that student government book. But yeah, no, I think that the academic lecture series is a very big indication that we don't have an excellent culture on campus. And the second point, and one that I think is more controversial, is sports. Now, sports are a very important part of leisure, right? I mean, leisure is not just about going to an academic lecture, because doing that wouldn't be fun all the time anyway. Sports are a really important part of, developing our bodies, having fun, community, etc., etc. And at Franciscan, we have pickup games, we have intramurals, and we have our NCAA teams. But one of the things I've always found interesting about the sports culture on campus is that a lot of the time when you have a Division III NCAA athlete, and their sporting event conflicts with an academic event, the conversation is never about how can we change our sports schedules in order to accommodate into academics, but it's always how can our athletes get their academic schedules changed in order to attend sports games. And I know that with NCAA sports, it's not completely up to the university, it's part of a larger cultural issue. But we're not talking about relative academic excellence here, we're talking about absolute academic excellence. And I think in a university that strives to truly have an excellent academic culture, instead of conforming ourselves and comparing ourselves to the Division I schools like Ohio State that let their students basically get a 1.0 GPA or less and still attend school so they can play football, I think what we should be doing is we should maybe even have a conversation of whether or not we should have NCAA sports at all if that is conflicting with students' ability to attend their academic commitments. So I think for these 2 points, and I know it's a longer conversation, unfortunately I'm out of time, but I'd say these 2 points and other points about our culture and what we do in our free time, it really shows us that our priorities don't lie in bettering ourselves academically, but they lie in entertainment and they lie in sports and other things, and that's not exactly what a university with an excellent academic culture would do. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cirillo. Do we have any questions for the speaker? Sharon?
So, are you saying that an excellent academic culture can be sustained without leisure that is not academic? So it sounds like you're saying that our leisure should still be academic.
Yeah, the short time makes it difficult to get your points across. I would say no, so I'm definitely not saying that. We need to have a whole bunch of different kinds of leisure activities. I was just saying that, especially with the sports point, I think having intramural sports and pickup sports is great, and NCAA sports would be great too if it were subordinated in its proper place in the hierarchy. But I think the problem is when we're looking at leisure, our hierarchy, at least among students on campus, the hierarchy of leisure, so to speak, I mean, when we're choosing how to spend our free time. Things that better us as people, so academic sorts of leisure, right? That's not even close to number 1. That's like maybe number 10. So I would say we have to have our priorities straight.
Excuse me, the speaker will wait to be recognized, even if she is a sibling. Would we have any other questions for Mr. Cirillo? Ms. Cirillo.
So, you mentioned your story about sitting in your room watching that. Were you speaking out of experience?
Thank you all for your time.
A good thing that Justine is sitting between them. All right, do we have any other open floor speeches this evening? Mr. Johnson.
So, I'm going to speak mostly out of personal experience and hopefully get to some principles from that. I'm a comm arts and history double major, and my experience thus far with, I'm also in honors, that's an important point. So, because of honors, I don't really have to do any core classes, especially as a history and comm arts double major. Literally all of my cores taken care of, except for a couple natural science things. So I did biology and embryology, and that was great. But what that means basically is my only exposure to intellectual formation is through honors. Because comm arts, that's not the point. History is kind of it, but I love it, but it's not the point. And that means any intellectual formation that I try to, form myself in is, outside of all that. It's outside of the classroom. And because of things like honors and comm arts projects and big papers for history, I don't have the time, plus extracurriculars. And that means that intellectual formation, which is the point of an academically excellent culture, is running up against everything that I'm trying to do to get my degree. And I think Franciscan's current academic culture, the way it's set up, or at least the core system, and just the way that classes are structured in general, means that if you're not actively pursuing theology, philosophy, then you're not necessarily going to get intellectual formation in the way you'd expect from a liberal arts school. And I'm someone who's trying to motivate and trying to go out and seek that. But think about someone who's not, right? Think about someone who, they're a marketing major or something like that. They aren't necessarily interested in philosophy, theology, outside of what's practical to get me to heaven, spiritual formation. But intellectual formation is something different. And so I guess my point is that Franciscan's current structure doesn't necessarily make it conducive to achieving that. And as a liberal arts school, that's the point. Even if for students who come here aren't necessarily interested in all that, they still ought to be exposed to it, because that's the whole point of the institution. And then I think just one more point to the opposing side. I think there's definitely, you've proved that there is an academic culture that exists, and But I think it kind of goes to Mr. Hahn's point that it's fertile soil to, grow a much stronger, much better one. But I don't think it proves that the current one is excellent. That's all.
The speaker's thanked. Mr. Bennett.
What would be those markers that you would say makes an excellent academic culture? And how would Franciscan achieve that?
So I think, really, I didn't think the core class thing, before this debate, I didn't really think about how the core was structured. But I really think reorganizing that, because even with, being in honors, it's like 4 hours of my week. And outside of that, I don't really get much exposure to it. And even with the core, it just kind of becomes, I have to take this isn't relevant to me. I'm just going to get it done and go to specialization. And so I think some restructuring of that, I don't know what it would look like, but to make that far more integrated, I think integration is the word that keeps coming to mind. Because even honors, for me, I keep coming back to this, is not well integrated into the rest of my life as a student. So that's the mission.
The speaker is thanked. Did he mention he's in honors? All right, do we have other open floor speeches? Especially looking if we have any female speakers looking to address academic culture on campus. Anybody at all? I mean, if we don't have speeches, then I'm just going to talk about the dress code. So, Mr. Fineman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Now, Mr. Hahn quipped at the beginning of his speech that he is a huge fan of this university, and I'm going to one-up him. I'm an air conditioner for this university. That's how much air is Now, I'm going to follow a little bit of what Jared, Mr. Johnson, was just saying. He used a really nice word there, integration, and I kind of want to elaborate a little bit on that with reference, again, to the core, as Mr. Larkins pointed out a little bit. But before I go there, I'm going to step back. So let's just take this term culture, right? And I like a nice definition of that taken from Christopher Dawson, which would be, it is a way of life of a people. And what's really significant about that is it's people. So who are we talking about, right? When we talk about academic culture, we're talking about all of us and students. We're also talking about our professors as well. It's the things that we do that create culture, and the things that we don't do that, therefore, leave a lack of culture where there should be culture. So, essentially, what constitutes, in my mind, academic excellence is this sort of purview of the whole. And I think one of the things that you can point out, kind of like Mr. Spieldener did, is that we do have all of these particular achievements, but we don't really get this holistic formation because there's not sort of the structure that inclines one towards sort of this holistic vision of culture, of tradition, of history as Catholics. And this is really, really critical nowadays because we don't actually have the process of enculturation that is vital and dynamic, which used to be the way in which people were sort of brought into this Catholic tradition that is ours. And so it places even a more sort of important role for a formal education to get us back into contact with that whole. And there's sort of a nice little anecdote that there's a guy that uses this in an introduction to a book that I really like called Makers of the Modern Mind, and in the introduction he goes through this little anecdote. The anecdote goes where there's 6 specialists who go to see an elephant, and they are all blind. They all go up very close, and they sort of see 6 very particular parts. One sees the tail, one sees the ears, one sees the trunk, and they all come up with these very particular interpretations of that. But there's no sense of the whole elephant. They don't see it, they don't know it. And I think that sort of in terms of the external structures, especially with the core, because that's, I think, is what the core is probably supposed to achieve, is sort of this contact with all of the different parts, and yet there's no vision of the whole. We do not, to go back to Mr. Johnson's point, integrate that. So there's two things. There's this sort of external structure that needs improvement for us to truly be academically excellent. But then there's the second point. And the second point has to do with all of you and myself, as students especially. We have to create culture. We have to participate in this. The Veritas Society, I think, has been an excellent sort of creator of this academic culture insofar as we have it on this campus, and I have been blessed to be a part of that, right? But it's up to each one of you. Plato says in the Republic that it involves, that the pursuit and practice of wisdom and truth involves suffering. And I think that's a huge point, because we think that sort of intellectual culture can be handed to us on a platter. That's not true, okay? We have to work at it, right? Writing a paper is actual suffering. Is it not? Okay, thank you. Right, and so we have to work through these things. We have to form friendships, people who are going to sort of, rebut our ideas, who are going to sharpen us as iron sharpens iron. These debates are a great example of that. But I would just say that for us to have an increasingly academic culture, we need two things. We need, one, better external structures, perhaps some sort of revised core, something that has sort of a coherence to it that inclines us towards this holistic vision. But two, it's up to each one of us as individuals to participate in that and to see that whole for ourselves and truly be changed and truly foster an academic culture on this campus that is truly excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do we have any questions for the speaker? Mr. Srill?
So in your speech you defined culture as the way of life for people, but then when you're talking about the core and you're saying the core needs to be more holistic and it has to bring us to a more holistic understanding of the person and stuff, how does that have to do with our way of life? Because one thing I would think is a pretty obvious response would be, well, you can have a holistic core and you can go to your core classes, but outside of just getting by in those holistic core classes, how does that help us with our way of life being more inclined to academic?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Shirella. The way I would answer that was literally the last thing I just said. I said it's 2 points. So it's one, it's external structures that incline us, right? The term incline, think of it incline. It's one of these. It makes it easier when you're inclined towards something. So you have the external structure, but then again, like I said, it's up to each one of us to work through that. So in some sense, the structure sort of a paper is a sort of objective way to try to organize information towards a thesis, towards a conclusion, towards the creation, towards the discovery of truth. But then you have to do it. You have to work through it. You have to create sort of events. And so when we create something like this is like the way in which we sort of incarnate that. This is the way we bring those ideas, say, out of the classroom and discuss them and try to pursue and discover truth, in its fullness, and that would constitute essentially academic excellence.
Thank you, Mr. Feiberman. Mr. Feiberman mentioned elephants in his remarks, which reminds me of a fantastic joke I came across the other day.
It's irrelevant.
What do you get when an elephant sits on your fence? A new fence. Do we have any more open floor speeches? Dr. Hart.
I want to say that I have appreciated a lot of points people have made tonight. I thought there have been some really good clarifications. I think both sides have argued very well. And I think the previous speaker, Mr. Josh, I don't know your last name, he said a lot of things I was thinking about, which is how do we define culture? But I want to disagree with him a little bit and say I'm more inclined to think that culture is a tendency or a gravity towards certain behaviors, or ideally towards certain goods. Okay, and when he talked about the incline at the end, that's what I'm thinking. That is to say, there's a tendency to, when you have sort of equally weighted options, otherwise equally weighted, that you'll decide this way if you belong to this culture, or even if there's a little bit of a tendency against the thing. Okay, so we talk about cultural mores, for instance, right? That means cultural customs and sort of moral rules, but they're not things that are simply set before us to obey or not. We feel some sort of tendency towards one thing. We feel disgust in not doing it, or we feel like we've crossed the line in not doing it, or something like that. Okay, so that's interesting because that ties into what's been talked about a lot tonight, which is what are the sort of rules that are set up for how you're going to go through university, especially with regards to the core. And that makes sense. We have to think about what are people going to be possibly compelled to do in order to achieve the good? What are they going to be allowed to do? That is, what are the bads that we're going to sort of look the other way on? Right? But there's a further question, I think, which is, what are the students, in fact, bringing to the culture of the university? And I think that this is especially relevant because the university is an artificial culture. It's an artificial society, right? That is to say, at all times, we are continually being rejuvenated or degraded by new incoming classes of students, right? And it's true in faculty too, right? So things have really gone down in the past 3 years. That's because I came 3 years ago. Right. But think about this. If I can memify, for instance. Okay, so you might think there are some different philosophies of teaching, and one would be, well, I'm going to teach, right, and the students get to accept it or not, right? And I would call that verb teaching, right? And then you could think, well, if nobody's learning, I'm not teaching, right? This is a common altruism in education. And I would call that woke teaching. That doesn't make sense. If there's no connection there, you're not actually teaching, right? But the bespoke teaching, right? That is from Plato, as the previous speaker sort of sideways brought up, right? And what he says is education is not, in fact, the handing of something from me to you, right? But it is the directing of the eye of your soul towards some good, which the soul itself is capable of apprehending. Okay, so that's interesting, and that suggests that it's all sort of on you, right, to cooperate or not. And to some degree, I think that's true. I really think it is, and I think if you guys were determined to change the culture, you could do it. You could do it actually a little bit more than But there's an inconvenient and difficult truth that we have to think about. And that again is tied to the fact that we have an artificial society, that students are coming in all the time. So consider the fact that when Plato talks about the education of his guardians, he talks about what is the nature of the students that we have to have in the first place. That is to say, the students that we have, and whatever our educational endeavor is, are they capable of doing the thing that we want them to do? 1 minute, did you say? Yeah. And if they're not capable of excellence, do we go for a subordinate good then, right? Or perhaps if you want to think about whether the academic culture is here is excellent, right? Is that a problem of how we're recruiting, for instance? Or is it a problem of why you wanted to come to college, for instance, or something like that? That is not an easy problem to change. And it may be that we need to adjust our ends, we need to moderate our ends in order to help as we can in that situation. So I thus incline you to neither proposition.
The speaker is thanked for his ambivalent speech. Do we have any questions for the speaker? Mr. Larkins.
If I may, the motion does state, this House believes Franciscan's academic culture is not excellent. Ambivalence does not seem to be possible on a toggle question. Therefore, would you please revise your judgment?
No.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. Do we have, do we have any speeches for the opposing side? So anybody arguing that Franciscan's academic culture is excellent? Mr. Wright.
You're here.
Thank you. As far as the motion goes, I think the standard has been set a little too high, like more in an absolute sense. So, the motion, okay, this institution has to be academically excellent. For the reasons expressed by Dr. Harwood, I don't think it has to be absolutely excellent. I think it just needs to contain excellence, and I think arguably it does. I mean, take even the Catholic Church, for example. The Catholic Church contains an academic, intellectual tradition, Franciscans, Dominicans, etc. But I think arguably the majority of us existing in the institution where academic culture and excellence is present, arguably most of us don't participate in that. And then the issue, I think, that you cannot necessitate that participation because it's coercion. So truth has to be pursued freely. And I think this institution does offer, even if it's limited, I do think that academic excellence is present. In the honors program, if you voluntarily want to pursue that truth in a greater degree than you're going to get on the average classes, then you have that opportunity. If you want to do it in a more extracurricular fashion, you have this opportunity here in the Veritas Society. So I think, and even then, even when you're not participating in these things, those just, whatever degree they're pursuing, the majority of the professors here are Catholic. You're getting exposed to Catholic. You're learning your field in the context of authentic truth and good, which is pursued. What Mr. Dinley was expressing, that we're pursuing as the principal aim here at this institution. And that drives everything that we do, hopefully. And again, like Dr. Harwood expressed, not everyone's going to be capable of that. And there's the issue of, there's always going to be people here that their parents may just expect, they pay the money and they're here. And they're not freely choosing that good. So I think it's, it's an unrealistic expectation for everyone to absolutely participate in that excellence. I think the excellence is here. Again, I think arguably it just has to be seen in a limited fashion. If you can see that the academic excellence is here, then I think you can say Franciscan does have an academically excellent culture present. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Do we have any questions for the speaker? Ms. Salmons?
So you seem to be saying that since the opportunity is present, then the culture is there, but isn't it also obvious that there's the opportunity to not grasp that excellence and to just, not try?
Well, it depends what you mean by opportunity, because I think the opportunity means that there are means available to that academic excellence that you voluntarily choose in pursuit of the good and truth, which has to be pursued freely otherwise. Right, and so the opportunities not being available, I think something not available means there's a lack of opportunity in the first place, so it's kind of like Anselm stuff where, you got to be a subject of thought so we can think it's non-existing, so in that sense, so I think there are the opportunities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryder. Do we have any more open floor speeches? Dr. Bennett?
Thank you. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I really love this topic. And when I think of academic culture, I think of a life of the mind that is habitual. That you want to live a life of the mind, have a desire, where you have a passion. You want to have great conversations about deep things, and that's what you want all the time. You stay up late all the time, right? You hang out with your friends and want those conversations. When you're in groups that don't have those conversations, you try to drop conversation bombs and provoke them so they have those conversations. Right now, we can go overboard like when I was in college and I offended people like when I realized I was an ass. Okay, but there's a good way to do it, right? But it was out of my passion. I'm like, okay, we just watched a movie. And now when I say, well, what do you guys think about that movie? And, oh, well, I like that. And, oh, I didn't like that. I'm like, and? What about the worldview that's expressed in that movie? Right? What about the kind of life, what about the beliefs about God that are assumed in that movie? What about the effect that movie has on one of your friends that went to a secular university? Right? What about that? Right? So it's, for example, that's what I'm talking about with the life of the mind. Or poetry. Right? To be able to appreciate the depth of poetry and not see it as something that's just sort of emotions and sort of, pretty and stuff like that, right? To be able to appreciate the depth of that and see, right, that the poet can plummet all the way down to the depths of the things that the theologians are trying to just analyze, okay? To be able to see that and appreciate that, to want to have a poetry night, right, at your house. Even if you start with poetry, right, to embrace being an amateur. Like, that is what it's about. It is about the love, right? But love isn't enough, okay? Because the problem is we fall into a false contemplative life where we think, okay, if we just love, we're good, we know the truth, right? But you can have the truth and not know the truth, right? You can know the truth and not live the truth, right? So somebody who wants the life of the mind, who wants an academic culture, they want to have the truth, right? They want to know the truth and they want to love the truth. It's how they live, it's everything they do. So to me, it seems like when I came here, I thought, you know what, the academic culture here is lacking. Okay, I want to improve this, right? I met students that really got interested in that kind of thing. I hung out with them, they hung out with me, right? Pretty soon the Veritas Society emerged, right? There's other things on campus that are like this, but there needs to be a lot more, okay? And look, it's not impious towards our university to say it's not excellent. It's not impious. Anybody who loves this university will want it to be excellent. And so they'll be looking around constantly saying, how can we be more excellent, right? So on one level, it's easy to argue that it's not excellent because it's not perfect, okay? But it's not excellent enough. If you really love it, it's not excellent enough. So you're doing whatever it takes to make it more excellent. What does academic mean? Academic doesn't mean information. Academic doesn't mean classes that you learn certain, periods of history and certain figures and their names and blah 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 and all that stuff. That's part of it, right? But that's just like table setting, right, for the feast. Okay? Academic means a place where you are free to pursue the truth. So there's an opportunity element that has to do with the structure, the faculty, the program, what provides opportunities. Okay? But to be academic means to embrace this bubble as a good thing. Right? You want to take this bubble and you want to take it wherever you go. Okay? So that you can pursue the truth freely. You can ask questions that are really difficult for other Catholics. Like, why are you a Catholic? Why do you think that's actually true? Right? Why not think that these people who wrote the Bible made certain things up for certain reasons? Right? How do you know that's not the case? Right? How do you know God really is so good? Right? When you see these things in the world that are really puzzling and evil, right? Or if you can ask really difficult political questions, right? Political questions about maybe the Republican conservative side isn't all that, right? But big deal. Why would it be? Right? It ain't Catholicism. It ain't the church. Why do we have to be afraid of certain questions? That's to me a sign that our culture academically is not excellent. Ask any question, right? Here's some sort of informative responses on both sides, a balanced perspective in a gentlemanly fashion, okay? Where people don't get freaked out. But yes, there's going to be intensity and passion because we love the truth. So expect that, right? So I guess what I'm saying in the end is I really do affirm the motion in a certain sense, but not because we're not perfect are we not excellent, right? But we're not excellent because we're not excellent enough for those who love this place. Okay, so I would encourage you all to vote for the motion, right? Because you think this place is awesome and it could be awesomer. Because you can take, right, your love of truth in every conversation you have, and it definitely has to do with outside of class, what I think of as academic culture. The leisure activities of thought, literature, music, right? I forgot to mention music, so I'm going to mention that even just not that thing, right? You can appreciate and love music, right? It can make you reflect on all those deep things and conversations you had, right? And you appreciate that. So to me, culture is more than just information, theology, philosophy. It's poetry, literature, it's music, right? It's dress, it's how you eat, it's etiquette, it's everything, okay? If you're a cultured person, right, whose whole life, right, is to support this ability to have amazing conversations. So that's all I'm going to say.
Do you have questions? Mr. Denley?
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful speech. I was affirming pretty much everything just about until the end when you said it is not an excellent culture. And it seemed like a judgment at the very end. What qualifications would you say that judgment's based on? What evidence of, and what would it look like for you to affirm that Franciscan does have an excellent academic culture?
There would be an institution where professors, right, could go to the CAF, right, and be paid for to hang out with students, right? Where the faculty and the students would come together and be able to have unstructured conversations about anything. I get to hear in my office hours or outside of class, right, where I get to hear their actual questions. Right, and so to me that would be one obvious thing. There's not enough time and location where there's conversations that can occur deeply between students and faculty. That's just one example, right? But I would say even faculty themselves, Right, when I came here, when I got a job, I came here in 2015, I expected there to be a lot more academic culture among the faculty. Yes, many of us are really smart, we have many publications and all this, and we're star-studded and everything. Great, right, but I want to have conversations with other faculty about their ideas. Right, and since that doesn't happen very much, I'm disappointed. Right, I'm not blaming any particular faculty members, right, but I feel like there's not enough conversation opportunities for me among my faculty members. Right, so there's not enough among students, I get the perception. There's not enough between students and faculty, and there's not enough between faculty and faculty, right? So to me, there's not enough opportunities, and those opportunities could be easily supported, I think, right, by some measures and some allotment of funds or whatever else you want to say, right? It's all priorities, okay? So I think we don't prioritize the things enough. I think we have the love, I agree with that, right? But that just shows that we have the love, right? It doesn't show that we've actually accomplished, right, the loving habits, right? If you're in love, you try to love more and more and more and more.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. Incidentally, I do think Honours 402 on Monday and Wednesdays, taught by Dr. Plato, is a very academically excellent class. Please give me an A. But do we have more open floor speeches? Mr. Fraser.
Thank you. I just kind of want to affirm what Dr. Plato was saying about the idea that the academic culture at Franciscan, I don't want to describe it as excellent necessarily. It's very good. It's great sometimes. But the word excellent suggests a certain level of heights that I don't think we're at right now. Yes, there's a lot of excellent elements at Franciscan groups like Veritas Society, honors clubs. But just because something contains elements of something like excellence doesn't necessarily make it that. For instance, my phone, piece of not very good tech that it is, it has multiple cameras on it. But if I were to be like, oh hey guys, look at my camera, it's not what it is. That is a camera, right over there. Hello, viewers. But yeah, I don't think we have we're not at a place of excellence. For instance, I am a theater minor. I am very involved in the department. I love so much of what we're doing. If you guys didn't see Sense and Sensibility these past few weekends, you missed out. It was a good production. I wasn't in it, but it was a good production. But the theater department here at Franciscan is so woefully deprioritized. Priorities being a thing that I was talking about. It is so deprioritized. Like, we had a professor that taught a lot of things like stagecraft, the art of creating the sets, that retired last year. We still do not have a replacement for it. It has been almost a year, and we still don't have a replacement. I mean, luckily, if you want to say class being canceled is a good thing, but luckily, the classes that he would typically teach have been canceled because of COVID and all of that. But there's still that massive deprioritization. But we can prioritize and we can find funds to create new sports fields. Because as everybody knows, sports are wonderful. They're very, very fun. But they're not a part of an academic culture. So, yes, it's true. It's true. Gosh, guys, I got an A in football. But yeah, that lack of priorities, I think, makes it so that Franciscan culture is very good. It's very good. It's great sometimes, but it's not excellent. And while we do live in an artificial society, that society is a result of what goes on at the university. And what has been going on at the university has not been able to create a place where an academically excellent culture can flourish, in spite of what all the marketing would tell us.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the speaker? Okay, Dr. Phillip?
How would you encourage students that may not know about theater very much about it or might not appreciate it as an art or as a cultural activity or academic? What would you say to them, or what would you think is a way to encourage them to learn to appreciate theater as an art, as a culture, as something academic?
I'd say honestly a part of it is in terms of like learning more about it. We do a lot to let people know about what's going on. One of the departments is doing stuff. It's like I have spent so many hours canvassing campus, just like hanging up flyers for student one acts for main stage productions. And then in terms of like appreciating the value of it, I would say just recognizing the impact that theater has had in not just academic culture, but in human society in general. Like it's through theater classes that I have learned about people like Eugene O'Neill, Anton Chekhov, some of the greatest storytellers in the history of mankind, but people that have redefined the art of storytelling. And if anybody is like, oh, but storytelling is not that important, it's like, storytelling is so innate to how we operate as human beings that the church has made telling stories a part of the highest form of prayer that we have. Or, another great example, a certain theater person by the name of William Shakespeare, who even people that aren't that interested in theater still agree is one of the greatest writers of the English language.
The speaker stand. All right, we have time for one more open floor speech. I'm going to try and recognize one of the female speakers, and then we'll move into the lightning round. And I encourage you to keep standing to be recognized. So we'll go to Miss Manager. I think he's been standing up.
Here.
So I would like to side with Dr. Harwood here a little bit. The other night, I received a text message from Clement Harold, and it said, would you be willing to oppose this motion? And I sat there thinking, how dare he assume that I would oppose that motion? I am firmly on the affirming side, of course. And so then I started talking to myself, as one does as a philosophy major, and I started thinking about why I thought that I affirmed the motion, and I just kept hitting a stopping point, and I couldn't come to a conclusion to my arguments. That was very disturbing, so I kept arguing, and I realized most of my arguments were actually turning on themselves, and I found myself firmly standing on the opposing side. I was rather confused. But I would like to turn down to the point that Dr. Theda made, that we may have something that's awesome, but it's not awesome enough. I think that when you hear that, you can see in that we have something that is excellent. We may not have something that is excellent enough. And I'm going to walk you through a bit of my own history, because I did not come straight out of high school to Franciscan. I actually went to University of Dallas. And it sounds a lot like what he is presenting as an excellent academic culture. And I will say that, as Athanasius Sorella said, we need to have people showing up to the 3 p.m. academic lectures. University of Dallas, we were in a much smaller room. We had the same number of people there, and we have, the curriculum is incredible. You come in as a freshman, and you think you know how to write a paper, and they tell you, oh honey, you're gonna get a C on your first paper, but don't worry, we'll bring you up from there. Everything about the university is about bringing you to truth, and they drive you deeper than I have ever been driven in my life. Now, sounds like I'm on their side, right? Well, I spent a year at University of Dallas. At the end of my first year, I was like, I really do not feel fulfilled. I don't know what this is. I have a lot of information. I've learned more than I had in my life. Why is this not satisfying? I thought that I should be satisfied learning the truth. I went and did missionary work for 8 weeks, taught the same 5 lessons to kids, 1st through 6th grade. And I can tell you now that I learned more in those 8 weeks about how to live out the truth, what the truth is, and why it matters to me in the way that I should live, and the way that other people should live, in those 8 weeks than I learned in my first year at University of Dallas. And in that instant, I decided to leave. Where should I go? Well, Franciscan, obviously. So I came here, and I have to say, I was astounded that I did not find the amount of conversation, intellectual, academic conversation that I find here every single day at University of Dallas, where the classes are harder, they drive you deeper. I didn't find that here. What I found at Franciscan is a bunch of people who love truth because they love God, and they're driven towards truth because they're driving themselves towards God. And we can't underestimate the fact that we have that, even if we might be lacking something. I'm just reminded of the first time I walked into the gym, which, sophomore year I walked in and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. But there were other people there, surprisingly. And I got on the treadmill and I started running, and the people next to me were panting and talking to each other, and I thought, why in the world would you do that to yourself? But they were talking about virtue, about truth, and how they could attain it and pursue it themselves. I couldn't find people to talk about truth with me at University of Dallas. Even in ministries, where we talked about how going to household stuff might not be the best thing for us, using our culture, etc. Why aren't we going to our academic lectures instead? I think that we can all say that people who have been in households know Monday night commitments. You are driven deeper. Sorry. Shout out to DDM. But our Monday night commitments, you come together as sisters and you're able to talk about the faith in a way that is centered around the truth, and it leads towards an academic love. Because what you believe and what you hear in those things draws you into your classes and drives you deeper. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Manjo, for your impassioned speech. I'd like to call on Mr. Hart for a question.
I just want to say thank you for your candidness and your openness. I just wanted to ask, though, so you brought up that you were able to have many conversations on a daily basis on this campus with individuals, and this is a sign of an existing and potentially thriving academic subculture. I would be ready to admit that. My question for you is whether or not this can honestly be said about half or even the majority of campus, that you have these kind of conversations, that you could go up to potentially anyone in the cafeteria, anyone at all, and have these kind of conversations, even half the time. Yeah, so what your take would be on that?
Well, I'm flattered that you think that I know how to talk to half the campus. I'm not that focused. I think that's where we may have excellence, we are lacking excellence comes in. I do think that the amount of people that we draw in as Veritas at our debates and at our events is significant. And the number of people that we get to talk about things walking down the street, I think it is significant enough to say that there is excellence here, even if there needs to be more and there needs to be change.
Thank you, Ms. Manjo. We're now moving into the lightning round. So these speeches will be just 2 minutes, and we'll be taking a few of those before moving to the closing statements. So do we have any speakers for the lightning round? The lady in the back.
Good evening, everyone. So, it's good that I'm in the lightning round because I didn't really have much to say. But I have a couple of different points. One of which is we have two opposing definitions of excellent, and we haven't really had those resolved. And we also have not really had an argument made for why you should listen to one side on their definition over the other by anyone who's spoken. We've had a lot of definitions thrown around on either side. And I think my own personal take on that is while perfection is certainly what we're striving for, it is unattainable. And therefore, the mean definition may be a better working definition of excellence, especially since it comes from a very credible source, Aristotle. Additionally, however, you can still poke holes in that argument by focusing on deficiencies. And I think we've seen a lot of that tonight. But actually, to counter some of those deficiencies, I'd like to make the point that while we may not have a culture that is solely academic and solely promoting academics, is that possible in our world today? We live in a world that focuses on pragmatism and practical degrees. I'm an accounting major, and yet I'm pursuing academic excellence. So it's possible, even in a degree like mine. And I believe it could be possible, it could be an option, that you could have a culture that promotes academics alongside a culture that promotes a pragmatic degree. And to answer Mr. Han's question, I've actually had conversations with people while I've been here that I would never expect to have a conversation with them about anything regarding the truth, the good, and the beautiful. And yet, people in the business department are fascinated by it, in spite of everything. In spite of having some professors sometimes who honestly really don't care about truth at all. They kind of suck sometimes. But there are professors who call you on, and the students here want to be called on. That is all.
Thank you very much for that eloquent speech. Do we have more lightning round speakers? The gentleman with a propensity to speak from the gallery, come down to the floor. Slow clap.
So one thing I want to say is that we have a very unique culture here at Franciscan. Instead of the fraternities and maternities of other colleges that focus very much on the drinking, smoking, and promiscuity that they very much like to focus on, we have the household we all know and love that focus a lot on God, Christ, each other, the truth, and with LOJ smoking. But something that I want to say is the fact that I've had conversations like the previous speaker that I wouldn't have anywhere else. I could just be out in front of Francis, just smoking my pipe, and then some random guy I've never met before will come sit in front of me and be like, you know, let's talk about philosophy for the next 3 hours. And you don't get that very many places. I've had some of the best conversations I ever could have had in this campus with these people, and that's a very cultural thing, I would think. It's the culture of the academics here. Many places, yes, they may have degrees, they may have smart people, but do they care about the truth like we do?
Hear, hear! Hear, hear!
I think that's all I really want to say. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. All right, I think we have time for perhaps 2 more lightning round speeches. If anybody else wishing to speak this evening, gentlemen here.
Hear, hear! Hear!
Hello. At the very beginning, I was for this motion.
Hear?
But this motion changed my mind. As I listened to the speeches. I really like what my philosophy professor said. I'm guessing that I didn't talk about it. I'm saying that we should be striving to be excellent, and we need to be the purpose of us being here on campus is to draw people to this great lovable university, and especially for the people who are maybe watching on camera. It's all ending. Anyway.
30 seconds.
And I think that we should be striving to get students here. Our classes should be excellent and thriving. Yeah.
You're here. You're here.
And I think that
Please conclude.
okay. In conclusion, that wasn't perfect. In conclusion, I would say that this university is unique. We love this university.
You're here.
And lastly, but not least, we should be my business is not perfect anyway. Lastly, not least,
Please conclude.
okay. Well, if there are any people watching online as well as here, I would say I would I hope you come here. We have a different year, and with COVID and everything, and that doesn't mean that this university is still brave to be a university, and still, I would say that first in our country.
Thank you for your speech. We'll now move to the final lightning round speech of the night. I'm afraid we weren't able to get to everybody. The chair would like to recognize the Assistant Chairman, Mr. Willard.
Okay, great. Well, what a great time this has been. You know, as we've all agreed, both sides, we are united, regardless of how we feel on the motion in our love of Franciscan. I did think you want to give it up for Franciscan because I heard we just creamed Benedictine in a meme war on Instagram. Is that right? Now, let's get into the meat of my speech. Look, we've heard a lot of stuff tonight about inclines and about Plato and Aristotle. We've heard a lot of great stuff. But I would like to ground us a little bit in the greatest, shall we say, the bae of all writers, Jane Austen. In a great conversation between Caroline Bingley and Elizabeth Bennet, when Caroline Bingley rather pretentiously says that she only knows half a dozen accomplished women, and when Miss Bennet inquires a little further, she says, well, an accomplished woman can sing, dance, draw, paint,
can do all these things to perfection, play the pianoforte. And, and Miss Bingley said, Miss Bennett says, I'm no longer surprised at you knowing half a dozen such accomplished women. I'm surprised that you know any. Now, with that in mind, I would simply say we've had a lot about. I would like to draw on Mr. Sutter's point. If you're going for absolute excellence, then I think every standard fails. If you're going for Dr. Plato's requirement of nothing is good enough for the lover, then everything fails. But I'll just say, and I know this is the lightning round, so I can't. You can't go into all the nooks and crannies of this discussion. But I dreamt my whole life growing up of going to Oxford University, because that's just the greatest university in the world, at least when you live in England. And I got to the stage right around junior year of high school when I realized that I didn't want to go to Oxford University, I wanted to go to Franciscan. And I didn't just want to go to Franciscan because I live in Steubenville. There's actually a reason to not want to go to Franciscan living. I wanted to go to Franciscan because I knew the education I would receive here would be better than that at Oxford. That I would learn with a deeper appreciation, a love, and an integration of the truth than I would have got at Oxford University. And for that reason, you should oppose the motion tonight.
Thank you, Mr. William, for that enthusiastic speech. We will now be moving towards closing statements. I remind you all again to stay to the end for the final vote. So we'll be thinking about which way you're going to vote tonight, and also join us for the social afterwards. So at this point, I want to invite the first or the closing speaker from the affirming side.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been an absolute delight to be part of this final debate. And among the other traditional things I will do in this closing speech is vociferously disagree with David Willey. And it's of course worth mentioning that even though I'm debating against Alex Denley, he's a close friend of mine, and I imagine that we'll be up quite late tonight agreeing about other things. So, and of course, I begin this by way of affirming that I am in fact united with all those here in our love for the university and the desire to This is in fact true. Right? And among the other things, I've been a benefactor and in fact a product of all the good things that come of the university. If you can believe it, I used to have a problem speaking too slowly. That's gone now. I think in light of many of the illuminating anecdotes that were given, it's worth affirming a point made by Dr. Harwood, which is that the type of student Franciscan University attracts has a lot to do with our experience of these sorts of things, and that's different from the institutionalization of a particular culture or the ends towards which we meaningfully structure ourselves. So Franciscan University invites the kind of people who want to smoke pipes and talk philosophy outside Francis. That's great. That doesn't mean the university is structured to create that same sort of feeling in people who do not come to the university. And this, I think, is the crux of the argument, whether or not the university is systemically ordered towards academic excellence. And there it is. But I think I can stand and affirm all the good things that have been mentioned about the university and the students that come here. Even the fact that I'm part of the Veritas Society is an affirmation of that. But I've also been involved with the society long enough and have served as the vice president and head of debate to know that even good things like this are against the grain at the university. And I have been on the receiving end of angry emails from faculty members asking us why we're doing certain things. So there's no degree to which we can end debating these things. I understand that. We can sort of do it ad nauseum. But in lieu of that, and if I haven't yet persuaded you with the arguments that I've made, I don't think in the time allotted to me I can continue to do anything more than I have. And so I think I'll make a cultural argument which seems to be fitting, and also an argument which I think the other side can't possibly come up with. It's actually, in fact, the best argument I've ever presented in a Veritas Society debate. Perhaps some of you are familiar with the cultural icon Emperor's New Groove. Often seen when Kronk is debating an angel and the devil about who's truth. And Kronk, I think, as a liberal educated gentleman, is really trying to discern what's correct. But the devil, realizing that he's losing, snaps and gets Kronk's attention and goes, hey, well look what I can do. He turns over and he's doing handstand push-ups. Kronk, discerning that he doesn't see the point. The angel, however, with better intelligence, perceives through this act of physical superiority that there is in fact a transcendental and intellectual superiority, and says to Kronk, no, he has a point. If I may, I'd like to present my final argument of the Veritas Society.
We're our side's done. We can stop the debate now.
I will remind the House that applause is prohibited even under the most unusual circumstances.
That was unusual.
We'll now move, thank you, Mr. Larkins, for his speech. We'll now move to the final speech from the opposing side.
Thank you. No backflips here, unfortunately. That's I just want to say thank you to everyone for a really fantastic debate. It's quite emotional being the last one on our anniversary weekend, and fantastic speakers. And this is evidence of academic culture, and one I very much love, and that our advisors would be present with us, wearing their academic garb. So my two questions I asked to Dr. Plato, fantastic speech, and Mr. Cirilla, is what are those markers going to be to where we can step over to the opposing side, defending Franciscan? And we heard different common core, where building a culture where you can actually have questions and ideas that are challenging. I think we're there, and there's many things we need to be adding to that, right? Yeah, having those late night conversations where you can just go on for hours and hours talking about particular philosophy questions. Things like Veritas Society that we're running these debates. And you guys have decided to show up to talk about academic culture at Franciscan. The fact that we're having nachos afterwards, right? I think all these externalities, they flow out of this love of truth, this really strange experiment I think Franciscan really is. It's kind of one of those things that you're inside of it, and so you kind of can glimpse out, the Franciscan bubble, right? Like, this is really special. Like, what we have is actually extremely special. And I would say we are academically excellent. We do have an intellectual culture that is excellent. There's many things I wish to, have it improve on. But it is a judgment call at the end of the day. Dr. Plato decided it's not, right? And it's not, and he mentioned it's not impious to be like, oh, it's not academically excellent because, and you still love the place. It's out of that love of the place, it's out of that love of Franciscan that we all wish it to be more academically excellent. But I believe, and I truly, and I'll affirm this, as Mr. Williams said, if I had a full ride to Harvard, I would still rather come here. And I think many would as well. I believe we're academically excellent. There's so much evidence for it. There's so many, I think these debates are great evidence of that. And so I would urge you to oppose the motion and affirm that Franciscan is academically excellent, and that we have all the markers of already an academically excellent culture and so many seeds for fruit in the future of many more projects, of many more, masquerade balls, like hopefully many of you were at last night. It was fantastic. I think we're just getting started with what potential we can have. And so I urge you to oppose the motion. Oppose the motion, affirm that Franciscan is academically excellent. And further, out of the love of the university and the love of the pursuit of wisdom and truth, there's much more to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denley. Thank you to everyone who spoke tonight. Apologies again for those we couldn't get to until next year, I suppose. We're now going to be moving to the final vote of the night. So if I will repeat the motion, and then I'll ask you to vote, and I'll invite my assistant chair to help me with the tallying. To the motion, this House believes that Franciscan's academic culture is not excellent. Will all those affirming the motion please stand and raise your hand? Thank you, Mr. Seated. Will all those opposing the motion please stand and raise your hand? Thank you, please be seated. Will all those abstaining from the motion please stand and raise your hand? Thank you, please be seated. I will give the final vote count in just a moment. Before that, I want to say a few final words, as I mentioned at the beginning. This being the last opportunity. This is certainly a momentous occasion for us. We've come such a long way over the last 3 years, and I look back on the very first Gentile Gallery debate that we had on traditional marriage roles, and we had no idea who would show up, if anyone would show up, or how the debate would go. But it went well, and it took off. And since then, we've created this movement on campus, which I think has become a hallmark of Franciscan's academic life, of its academic culture. And I'll give the result of the vote in a moment, but again, as I said at the beginning, just to reiterate, I think it's important for us as we leave this gallery tonight to remember that all of the discussion we've had tonight comes from a love of our dear alma mater, Franciscan University. And as some of the speakers alluded to, I think we can say, we can boldly and enthusiastically say, without hyperbole, that Franciscan University is the greatest university in the world. And I think I'm reminded of Pericles, who I read freshman year, in his great funeral oration recorded by Thucydides, where he extols the virtues and the greatness of Athens, but he also makes the point that there are ways in which the people of Athens and the story of Athens at sometimes has its flaws, it has its faults. But he makes the point that even then, there's still a need to be patriotic towards this ideal of Athens, which they were all working towards. That there's a distinction between Athens in its day-to-day faults, its day-to-day flaws, and Athens as an ideal which they could all love and be patriotic about. And I feel the same way about Franciscan. Is, it has its faults, it has its things that we like to complain about, but at the end of the day, this is a place that we truly love. And, during the last 3 years, I've been blessed to be able to function in a number of different roles, leadership roles on campus. But I can truly say that there's been no role more meaningful to me than the role as president of this society. So in many ways, this weekend, and especially this event, has been a passing on of the torch to the freshmen, the sophomores, and the juniors in the room. And I just say I want to encourage you on in that endeavor. So, you're here. I'll give the final vote result, and then we have the customary applause, but then I invite you all to stand for the Salve Regina. And so, for the last time, the motion, this House believes that Franciscan's academic culture is not excellent. With 36 votes opposing, with 8 abstaining, and with 44 affirming, the motion has passed. For the Salve Regina.
What
pray for us, sinners, Holy Mother of God.
That we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
And in the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you all. The social will be in the JC tent across the room.